What kind of man signs away hundreds of lives before noon and still believes he's in control? The glass doors of the downtown Chicago tower slid open with a quiet, expensive hush, and Alexander Vance stepped out into the gray morning like a man untouched by consequence. The city moved around him, horns in the distance, heels clicking on wet pavement, a cold wind rolling off Lake Michigan. But none of it reached him. It never did. At 38, he had built an empire that didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for approval, and certainly didn't look back. His charcoal overcoat fit like it had been tailored onto his skin. His expression calm, unreadable, the kind of stillness that made other men lower their voices without knowing why. Behind him, attorneys lingered near the entrance, clutching folders that contained the future of an entire block of aging apartments on the south side. In less than an hour, with one signature, those buildings would be cleared, legally, efficiently, and without noise. It was just another deal. Another line in a ledger no one else was allowed to see. His security detail moved information, subtle but precise, scanning faces, hands, anything out of place. Black SUVs idled at the curb, engines low and patient, like animals waiting for a command. Alexander didn't rush. He never rushed. Power, he believed, revealed itself in how little you needed to hurry. A driver stepped forward to open the rear door, but before Alexander could take that final step into insulation and control, something broke the rhythm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a small hand, cold, trembling, and impossibly determined, gripping the edge of his coat. The movement was so slight that most people would have missed it. But Alexander didn't miss anything. He stopped. Not fully, just enough to feel it. The world around him shifted in that instant. One of the guards reacted first, stepping in, voice already tightening with authority. But Alexander lifted a single finger. That was all it took. Silence fell like a curtain. Slowly, deliberately, he looked down. And there she was. A little black girl, no older than 8, standing in shoes soaked through from the morning rain, her jacket too thin for the cold, her braids damp and clinging to her cheeks, her eyes wide, steady, and far too aware, locked onto his as if nothing else in the world existed. She didn't flinch under the weight of his presence. She didn't look away. In her small hand was a crumpled $5 bill, folded and refolded so many times it barely held its shape. Without hesitation, she pressed it into his palm. "Please," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Save my mama." And for the first time that morning, Alexander Vance didn't move. How long can a man pretend he feels nothing before a child's voice makes the silence unbearable? The $5 bill sat in Alexander Vance's hand like it weighed far more than it should. The paper damp from rain, edges softened from being folded again and again, as if it had been held onto for dear life. Around him, the city resumed in fragments. Engines humming, footsteps passing. Someone across the street laughing. But inside the tight circle formed by his security team, everything felt suspended, waiting for his next move. One of the guards stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Boss, we need to go. This isn't safe." Another reached gently but firmly for the girl's shoulder, trying to guide her away without drawing attention. "Hey, sweetheart, you can't be here," he said, rehearsed politeness masking urgency. But Nia Carter didn't move. Her fingers had already released Alexander's coat, yet somehow she remained anchored in place, like the world had decided she belonged right there in front of him. She didn't cry. She didn't plead again. She simply watched him, her breathing shallow but steady, as if she had already said everything that mattered. Alexander's gaze dropped to the bill, then lifted back to her face. He had seen desperation before. Men begging for second chances, partners trying to renegotiate deals they had already lost. But this felt different. There was no performance in her voice, no calculation in her eyes. Just a statement. Just truth. Still, instinct pushed back. He had built his life on control, on reading people quickly, on never allowing emotion to interrupt logic. And logic told him this was a distraction, coincidence, a street-level problem that had nothing to do with him. "Who told you to find me?" he asked, his tone calm, almost distant. Nia blinked once, as if the question surprised her. "Nobody," she said. "I just knew you could fix it." A faint ripple moved through the men around him, subtle but real. Confidence like that didn't belong to a child standing in soaked sneakers. Alexander narrowed his eyes slightly. "Fix what?" he asked. The words came out quieter this time, less like a test and more like something he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Nia swallowed, her small hands curling into the sleeves of her jacket. "She can't breathe anymore," she said. "No drama. No tears." Just a sentence that landed heavier than anything shouted. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the guard nearest her hesitated, his grip loosening just enough to let her stand on her own. Alexander exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that usually reset the world back into order. But something lingered, something unsettled. His assistant stepped in, tablet already in hand. "Sir, we're on a tight schedule," she reminded him softly. "The signing is in 40 minutes. The partners are waiting." He knew that. Of course he knew that. Entire timelines moved because of his decisions. Entire neighborhoods shifted because of his signatures. And yet, standing there on a damp Chicago sidewalk, with a $5 bill pressed into his palm and a child refusing to look away, the urgency of that meeting felt distant, almost irrelevant. Alexander glanced once toward the waiting SUV, then back at Nia. "Where is she?" he asked. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. And just like that, the balance of power shifted quietly, almost invisibly, but enough that everyone around him felt it. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself until it's already too late to undo. What if the address she gives you is one you've already signed away? The question didn't come out loud, but it settled somewhere deep as Alexander Vance watched Nia Carter reach into her jacket pocket and pull out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't clean. The ink had bled slightly from the rain, numbers. Smudged but still legible if you looked closely enough. She held it up with both hands, like it mattered more than anything else she owned. "Here," she said quietly. "It's our place." Alexander took the paper without rushing, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second, cold, smaller than he expected, but steady. He glanced down. An address. South Side. A building number that didn't stand out to anyone unfamiliar with the city's quieter corners. But Alexander didn't operate unfamiliar. He knew Chicago block by block, not from maps, but from leverage. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as recognition flickered. Not fully formed yet, just a shadow of something he couldn't place. "You walked here?" he asked, still looking at the paper. Nia nodded. "It's not that far." The lie was soft, almost polite. The nearest train stop alone was over a mile away. One of the guards shifted his weight, clearly aware of the distance, the cold, the time. "Boss," he murmured again. "This isn't." Alexander didn't look up, but the guard fell silent anyway. Control didn't require volume. It never had. "How long has she been like this?" Alexander asked. His voice quieter now, less distant, as if something in the rhythm of the moment had changed without his permission. Nia hesitated, just for a breath. "Since last night," she said. "She tried to get up this morning, but she couldn't." "No embellishment. No dramatics. Just a timeline." Alexander folded the paper once, carefully, aligning the edges as if precision might restore order to something that felt slightly off balance. His assistant stepped closer, glancing over his shoulder. "Sir, that block." She stopped mid-sentence. He didn't need her to finish. He already knew. The recognition clicked into place like a lock turning. That address wasn't random. It wasn't outside his world. It was inside it, deep inside. One of the properties flagged for clearance. One of the signatures waiting on his desk. The same deal he had just walked out of. For a fraction of a second, something passed through his expression. Too quick for most to catch, but enough to make his assistant straighten, her posture tightening with sudden awareness. "We're scheduled to finalize that acquisition today," she said carefully, choosing each word. "Utilities were reduced last week to encourage vacancy compliance." The words were clinical, efficient. designed to remove emotion from consequence. Alexander said nothing. His gaze lifted slowly from the paper to Nia's face. She was watching him the same way she had from the beginning. Steady, unblinking, as if she had already decided he would help and was simply waiting for him to realize it. They turned off the heat, she added, almost as an afterthought. Mama said it was okay at first. But then, it got really cold. The air between them shifted again, heavier now, layered with something unspoken but undeniable. Alexander looked past her for a moment, toward the city stretching out in gray lines and distant movement, then back down at the small figure standing in front of him. The $5 bill was still in his hand, the address in the other, 2 pieces of paper, 2 versions of truth, one he had created, one he couldn't ignore. And for the first time that morning, Alexander Vance realized this wasn't a coincidence. It was a collision, and he was standing exactly where it would land. What happens when a man realizes the problem standing in front of him is one he created himself? The answer didn't come quickly, but it settled into Alexander Vance's chest like something heavy and unfamiliar, pressing against a space he had spent years keeping empty. The folded address in his hand wasn't just a location anymore. It was a mirror, and for a moment, just a moment, he didn't like what it reflected. His assistant shifted beside him, lowering her voice to something meant only for him. "We can still proceed as planned," she said. "Relocation notices have been issued. Legally, everything is clean." Clean. The word lingered in the air, sharp and precise, like it belonged in a boardroom, not on a street where a child stood in wet shoes holding on to hope like it was the last thing she had left. Alexander didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at Nia Carter again, really looked this time. Not just at her presence, but at the details he had almost ignored. The way her sleeves were too long, pulled over her hands for warmth. The faint tremble in her shoulders she was trying to hide. The quiet determination in her posture, as if leaving wasn't an option she had ever considered. "How long have you lived there?" he asked. Nia tilted her head slightly, thinking. "Since I was little," she said. "Mama says it's the only place that still remembers us." The words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded inherited. Alexander exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, and for the first time it didn't feel like control, it felt like hesitation. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Once, twice, persistent, the world calling him back to where he belonged. He didn't answer it. "Sir," his assistant tried again, more carefully now, sensing the shift she couldn't quite name. "If we delay, it sends the wrong signal. People are watching this deal." Alexander finally turned his head toward her, his expression calm but different. Less distant, more focused, like something inside him had recalibrated. "They're always watching," he said quietly. "That's never stopped me before." And that was true. Nothing had. Not pressure. Not risk. Not consequence. But this wasn't pressure. This was something else. Something that didn't fit into numbers or contracts or leverage. His gaze returned to Nia. "Why me?" he asked, the question softer now, stripped of its earlier edge. "There are hospitals, clinics, shelters." Nia shook her head, small but certain. "They said we needed insurance," she replied. "Or money we don't have." She paused, then added, "And Mama said, if something really bad ever happens, find the man who never says no." A faint flicker crossed Alexander's face. Not pride, not quite recognition, something closer to discomfort. "And you think that's me?" he asked. Nia didn't smile. She didn't hesitate. "I know it is," she said. The certainty in her voice landed harder than any accusation could have. Around them, the street continued to move, but within that small space, everything felt suspended again. Like the world was waiting to see which version of Alexander Vance would answer. The one who signed papers without looking back. Or the one, standing here holding $5 that suddenly felt like a test he hadn't agreed to take. He looked down at the bill again, then at the address, then back at her. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander Vance didn't know which decision would cost him more. What if the man holding the power to save her is the same man who took everything away. The realization didn't arrive all at once for Alexander Vance. It unfolded slowly, like a truth that had been waiting patiently for him to notice. The address in his hand, the quiet certainty in Nia Carter's voice, the timing of it all. It wasn't random. Couldn't be. He turned slightly, just enough for his assistant to see his expression change, subtle but unmistakable. "Pull up the full file," he said, his voice low, controlled, but no longer detached. She hesitated for half a second before tapping rapidly on her tablet, pulling records from systems that weren't meant to be accessed on a sidewalk. "Property ID 47B, she read quietly. "Multi-unit residential. Pending acquisition. Tenants flagged for relocation. Notices issued 2 weeks ago." Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. "Scroll," he said. The screen shifted. Names appeared. Numbers. Units. And then one line. Apartment 3C. Carter.
Elena Carter.
The name settled into the space between them like something undeniable. Alexander didn't blink, but something behind his eyes shifted, a calculation interrupted by something far less predictable. "There's more," his assistant added carefully. "Maintenance reports show delayed service requests, heating complaints, medical assistance flagged but unresolved." She paused, then lowered her voice even further. "The building's been deprioritized to encourage faster vacancy." The words were precise, corporate, stripped of emotion, but they echoed louder than anything else that morning. Alexander looked down at Nia again. She hadn't moved. She hadn't asked another question. She was simply waiting, as if the answer had always been his to give. "You said your mama can't breathe," he said, his tone quieter now, almost measured against something internal. Nia nodded. "She tried to sit up," she said, "but she got tired really fast. So I told her I'd find you." Alexander exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that usually signaled a decision already made. But this time it didn't bring clarity. It brought something else, pressure. Not from outside, from within. His phone buzzed again. The deal. The partners. The timeline that had been set in motion weeks ago. Everything aligned, predictable, controlled. And now, interrupted by a name on a screen and a child who refused to leave. "Sir," his assistant said, more cautious now, sensing the shift but not understanding its full weight. "This is standard procedure. We've done this before. If we stop now, it complicates everything." Alexander didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the $5 bill still resting in his palm. Worn, creased, carried with intention, not as payment but as proof. He had spent years building a world where every transaction had a value, every decision a measurable outcome. But this didn't fit. This wasn't leverage. This wasn't strategy. This was something far more dangerous, because it wasn't asking for profit. It was asking for accountability. He closed his fingers slowly around the bill, then looked back at the screen, at the name that now felt impossible to ignore.
Elena Carter.
Not just a tenant, not just a line in a report. A consequence. One that had been signed, approved, and executed under his authority. Under his name. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander Vance felt something he couldn't negotiate, couldn't redirect, couldn't silence. The weight of a decision that had already been made, colliding with a moment that demanded he make a different one. He lifted his gaze to Nia, and in that quiet, suspended space between power and truth, one thing became clear. This wasn't about saving a stranger. This was about facing what he had already done, and deciding if he was willing to change it. What happens when a powerful American mafia boss, known for controlling entire city blocks without hesitation, is stopped by a little black girl who offers him her last $5 and a plea to save her mother? This emotionally charged story blends power, morality, and redemption in a gripping narrative of dark romance where authority collides with innocence. As the mafia boss confronts the consequences of his own business decisions, the little black girl becomes the unexpected force that challenges his identity, revealing hidden truths buried beneath wealth and control. Set in a realistic American urban environment, The story explores how a man who never says no begins to question everything when faced with unwavering faith from someone who has nothing left to give. This dark romance unfolds through tension, moral conflict, and a gradual emotional awakening, where every decision carries weight beyond money and influence. The narrative highlights the stark contrast between extreme power and vulnerable humanity, drawing viewers into a compelling journey of accountability and transformation. As secrets surface and past actions collide with present consequences, the Mafia boss is forced into a moment of truth that redefines his understanding of control, justice, and redemption. This dark romance is not about violence or dominance, but about the quiet, devastating realization that true power lies in choosing to protect rather than destroy. With layered storytelling, dramatic irony, and emotional depth, this dark romance captures the essence of human dignity in the face of overwhelming authority. Ultimately, this dark romance delivers a powerful message about second chances, moral reckoning, and the unexpected ways a single act of courage can change everything. How do you walk away from a decision when a child is standing there believing you won't? The question lingered in the cold Chicago air as Alexander Vance closed his hand around the $5 bill, the paper now warm against his palm, as if it had already chosen a side. The city didn't stop for moments like this. Traffic continued. People passed. Somewhere, a siren echoed faintly. But inside the invisible perimeter surrounding him and Nia Carter, time had slowed into something heavier, something that refused to move forward until he did. His assistant shifted again, more tense now, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, the board is already asking where you are. If we don't show up, it raises questions we can't easily control." Control. That word again. It had always been his advantage, his weapon, the reason no one second-guessed him. But now it sounded smaller, incomplete. Alexander glanced toward the SUV waiting at the curb, the door still open, the engine idling patiently like it trusted him to return. That vehicle represented everything he had built: distance, protection, certainty. All he had to do was step inside, and this moment would disappear like it never happened. Another story, another face, another problem solved by not being his. He had done it before, hundreds of times. But this time the problem had a name.
Elena Carter.
And a witness who refused to let him forget it. He looked back at Nia. She hadn't moved. Her shoulders were still trembling slightly from the cold, but her eyes, those steady, unshaken eyes, remained locked on his, as if she could already see the answer forming before he spoke it. "How far is it?" he asked. The question surprised even him. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't strategic. It was direct, real. Nia blinked once, then pointed down the street. "About 6 blocks, she said. Then left. Then a broken fence. The directions were simple, memorized, repeated enough times to become instinct. One of the guards stepped forward immediately. "Boss, if we're going, we'll need to clear the route first. Give us 10 minutes. Alexander shook his head once. "No dilas." The words came out sharper than expected, cutting through the tension like a decision already made. His assistant frowned slightly. "Sir, this isn't standard protocol." He turned to her then, fully this time, his expression calm but no longer negotiable. "Neither is this situation." That was all he said. But it was enough. The kind of tone that ended conversations before they began. He stepped away from the SUV instead of toward it, the subtle shift sending a ripple through his team. The driver hesitated, then slowly closed the door, the sound echoing louder than it should have. Alexander adjusted his coat, not out of habit, but as if preparing himself for something he hadn't planned for, something he couldn't control. He looked down at the address one more time, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket beside the phone that continued to vibrate with unanswered calls. Deals waiting, decisions pending, an entire system expecting him to follow through. He ignored all of it. "Lead the way," he said. Nia didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply turned and started walking, her small steps quick, purposeful, as if she had always known this would happen. Alexander followed, his pace slower, deliberate, every step pulling him further from the world he controlled and closer to one he had already changed without ever seeing. The distance wasn't far, 6 blocks, but with each step, something inside him shifted, something quiet and unfamiliar, like a door opening in a place he had long ago decided to keep closed. And behind him, the city kept moving, unaware that one of its most powerful men had just chosen a path he couldn't walk back from.